What's up, language leaders? Welcome back. So today we're talking about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. We're going to discuss raising bilingual or multilingual children. So I have two bilingual children of different ages and different stages of development. So I am very excited to dive into this topic with you and debunk some myths that may be holding you and your family back. Well, my life in a nutshell, in case you're new here, my name is Erica. I was born and raised in Kentucky, USA. I learned Spanish to fluency without school, without moving abroad, without any native Spanish-speaking family. I worked as a medical interpreter for many years, English, Spanish. I later met my husband, who's from Mexico. He speaks Spanish. We have two daughters. One was born in the US. She's now 7 years old. And the second was born here in Mexico, where we now live. She is 2 years old. My 7-year-old is completely fluent in English and Spanish. My 2-year-old, well, her language is still developing, but she also speaks English and Spanish. And I'm currently learning French, so I'm teaching that to both of my daughters as well. So I have a lot to say on this topic from various different angles and perspectives. So we're going to likely divide this into two parts. Today, I really want to debunk some myths that you may have about raising bilingual or multilingual children, because it is very important to understand this information before you even move forward. And then in our next video, we'll be discussing some strategies to actually get this done. So if you're excited and ready to get into this with me, definitely give me a like, consider subscribing and hitting the bell, otherwise you'll miss our next video, which is going to be on the same topic. So when I was pregnant with our oldest daughter, keep in mind we're in the US at this point, people started asking me, so are you going to teach her both languages? Okay, you may be thinking, that is not a strange question. It is perfectly normal for someone to ask that. But it was strange to me, at least at the time, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, her father is Mexican. He speaks Spanish and quite a bit of English. I'm American and I speak English and Spanish. Why would we raise our children to only speak one language? Here in Mexico, where we now live, same deal. When I was pregnant with my second, same round of questions. So, ¿le vas a enseñar los dos idiomas? ¿En serio? So I'm very used to these questions now, but in the beginning, they just seemed so strange to me. But I soon came to understand, and forgive me for being so naive in the beginning, many children in a similar situation are growing up with only one language. I have since spoken to dozens and dozens of families, and I think that I can now safely say that I understand some of their reasons. We're going to talk about 5 myths that may be holding you back. Number 5 is very important and my favorite because it comes from a very personal space. So stay tuned till the end of the video. Myth number 1, I'm going to delay them. They're going to be behind and they're going to need speech therapy. No, teaching a child another language does not cause speech delay. Now, what some studies have shown is that some bilingual children do develop language fluency a bit later than their peers. We're talking about a few months later, because they are processing double the amount of words. Other studies have shown that they may read to fluency a bit later than their peers as well for these same reasons. This does not happen to all children, and even if it does, it sorts itself out very quickly. And the advantages of teaching your child more than one language far outweigh having to wait a few extra months for them to achieve language fluency. Every child is wonderful and different and unique. So with my oldest, none of that ever happened. Quite the contrary. She started speaking very early and having intelligent conversations with strangers at 2 years old. When she was 2, she would translate between me and her dad. She would come and tell me something in English and then go tell him the same thing in Spanish. As far as reading, she's just finishing up 1st grade now, and her reading is a bit above average in both languages. languages. She's also homeschooled, so that may have nothing to do with bilingualism. It's really impossible to say. My youngest is 2.5, and she also speaks both languages. She speaks them like a 2-year-old, so I can't exactly say how her language is going to develop. It will be interesting to see, and I will definitely share that with you guys. She did start speaking a bit later than my oldest daughter. I would say that she was probably just turning 2 when she started speaking quite a bit more, and now at 2.5 she talks a lot. In any case, by the time most bilingual children are in school, and that's kind of the phase where we all worry, how's he going to do in school? They are usually right on par with their peers and have no communication problems whatsoever. If a child does have a delay or a need for speech therapy, they're normally going to have that delay in both languages, and it has nothing to do with the fact that they learn 2 languages. Learning 2 languages is still going to be an advantage for that child. Myth number 2. Children will be confused if they learn more than 1 language at the same time. Now, if by confused you mean that they may mix their languages even within the same sentence, yes, they most likely will. But that's not a bad thing, nor does it mean that they're confused. In fact, oftentimes they know that they're pulling and borrowing from another language. They will search for any word that they know in their vocabulary in order to express themselves. I do not see this as a bad thing. I really think that it's an advantage because they're not limited to just 1 language. I mean, think of it this way. Do we as parents feel like we've failed when they point to something because they can't think of the word? Of course not. That's normal and natural. So why would you feel any different if your child cannot think of the English word and therefore resorts to Spanish, and vice versa? The important thing is that they're expressing themselves. Everything else will work itself out eventually. My oldest daughter began distinguishing the languages very early. She really didn't mix them much at all, which was really weird and surprising to me because I had done all of this research on what's supposed to happen with bilingual children, and they're supposed to be mixing words left and right. But she really didn't for some reason. She would come and speak to me in English because I did make an effort to speak to her in English. By this point, she was born in the US, but by this point we lived in Mexico when she started speaking because she's lived in Mexico since she was 10 months old. So when she started talking, we lived in Mexico, I said, I really need to try to speak English to my child. I'm going to discuss this more in part 2 of the video when we talk about methods and strategies to raise your children to be bilingual without driving yourself crazy. But the point is, she didn't do much mixing of the languages. She would come and speak to me in English. She would go tell her father the same thing in Spanish, even though he understands English, but she had this conception, mommy English, daddy Spanish. I would say that my youngest mixes the languages a bit more than my oldest did. Again, I am not at all concerned about this. Adults do this all the time. I do this all the time. I mix languages. If I'm speaking to someone who understands both English and Spanish, lazy brain starts up, and if I'm too lazy to think of the English word or too lazy to think of the Spanish word, I will say whichever one of the 2 come to mind. At the end of the day, we're all communicating. I recently found out something new from a website called theconversation.com. It says bilingual children as young as 10 to 15 months babble differently depending on who they're interacting with. For example, English babble sounds to mother, French babble sounds to father. Isn't that cool? Myth number 3. Well, I want my kids to be bilingual, but I need to teach them 1 language at a time for optimal results. Well, that's a suggestion that I do make to my adult students who are learning another language, but it is definitely not something that I would suggest for a child. Children are perfectly capable of learning multiple languages at the same time. Now, as far as learning to read 1 language at a time, that's kind of more up to you. I haven't come across any really clear-cut studies on this, and I kind of struggled with this a little bit when my daughter was maybe 4, and I thought, okay, she's gonna learn to read Spanish at school. This was before we started homeschooling. So should I just reinforce that Spanish reading at home, Or should I reinforce that Spanish reading at home and teach her to read English at home? Should I wait till she's a pretty fluent Spanish reader? I don't know. But at the end of the day, I chose to teach her both at the same time. She's done well. So just do your research and do what works for you and your child. See how they respond to that. However, as far as overall learning a language one at a time, no. Generally, the younger a child is, the better they're going to be able to pick up on the pronunciation and the intonation. So to wait and teach them only one language at a time really is just wasting time. Which leads to the next myth. Myth number 4. I have an older child. They say that past 5, they don't really do really well with the languages. It's too late for me. If adults and older adults who are very advanced in years can learn a new language, why would your teenager not be able to do the same thing? I did not know a word of any language other than English until I was a teenager. And I progressed to fluency and built a career and a life around languages. Like they say, the best time to start was yesterday. The next best time is now. Myth number 5, and I really want you guys to listen to this one. If neither I nor my partner are bilingual, we cannot teach our child another language. I can see how this would sound reasonable to you, or why you would think that the job of teaching your child another language is the teacher at school or some other external source. And of course, that's totally fine. The more exposure that they have to another language, the better. However, the easiest way for me to respond to this myth is to use my own experience. My mom and dad, who were my only immediate family, I'm an only child, they were straight up English-speaking people, nothing else. My dad started getting interested in Spanish before me. He had learned some Spanish on his own. It was something that he was interested in. But I had zero interest in learning Spanish. I planned on leading a happy, English-only speaking life until one day things changed. I talk about that more in my one of the very first videos that I uploaded to this channel. You can check that out right here. But long story short, my initial support for learning the language came from him. I remember he taught me and taught my mom how to read Spanish, and that was pretty much all I needed. From that point, we all continued to learn together. But this is important, guys. The motivation and the example originally came from my father, even though he didn't speak much at the time. So parents, listen up. You have a big influence on your child's life. Don't force them to learn languages. No one ever forced me, but do let them see your interest. Start learning another language yourself. It may be one of the best decisions that you ever make for your children. So if you are in that place now and you're ready to set a good example for your children, then definitely download a free copy of my Fluency Blueprint. It's going to walk you step by step on how to get started learning a new language with the goal of fluency from home. You can download a free copy of your blueprint at ericaelsewhere.com/blueprint, and I'll leave a link for that below as well. If you have received inspiration from this video, and I hope you have, definitely leave me a like so YouTube can show it to more people. By the way, if you're a bilingual family or a multilingual family, or you want to be, definitely comment below. I would love to hear your experiences, your goals, your hopes, your dreams, your plans. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification, because in our next video, we're going to talk specifically on what you can do to raise bilingual or multilingual children. If you have children, you don't want to miss this one. Thank you so much, guys. And remember, don't settle for just learning. Go out and live a new language. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.